Is that 10 seconds, Elise?
Yes, I've started the video.
Okay, I'm going to call this District of Tofino Council meeting to order on the 9th of March 2021 at 4:30 p.m. Acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. As a notice to attendees, this meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda, please? Councillor Chalmers, seconder.
Second.
Councillor Anderson. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion is carried. I'll move from the chair that the minutes of the regular council meeting held February 23, 2021 be adopted. Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? All those in favour? None opposed. Motion carried. I'll move from the chair that the minutes of the special council meeting held March 1, 2021 be adopted. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Chalmers. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed. A motion is carried. Elise, do we have any public comment?
Through the chair, no one has signed up, although I just want to make a note to Rachel Sutton, who I know is in the participant audience today. She had let me know that she did want to speak to an item on the agenda. And Rachel, if you did want to speak on the agenda, now is the time to use the Q&A function in your webinar controls and just type something in there and I will unmute you if you wanted to use this section.
So maybe I'll just carry on with the mayor's report and then we'll see if she's dialed in. So mayor's report, I only have a couple of things to say. I substituted for Councillor Chalmers at a VHAR meeting and the main message was what we've been hearing from Bonnie Henry is when it's time for an injection to call in when it is time rather than before. And I think we've all been hearing rumours that Tofino, they're going to try and vaccinate everybody all at once in a few days. Second item I've got, this afternoon I participated in a roundtable with the resort community mayors, Bonnie Henry, Minister Osborne and a few other ministers, just to see how things were going on in the resorts. I relayed that we had an issue with staff housing, that there was a need for people to self-isolate. And Bonnie Henry said that they would look into that. And there's expected to be a message coming out this week to deal with spring break. And they're asking that districts' own messaging be in line with their messaging. And there's also going to be some messaging about upcoming St. Patrick's Day celebrations, because apparently people have problem keeping the masks on when they're drinking. So look forward to that. So I'll move on to correspondence. Are there any questions, Councillor Chalmers?
Yeah, I did get the fact sheet for the meeting that you attended for me, and I thought I'd just clarify just for public that the vaccine for the town, it wasn't a rumor, that was in the fact sheet, and it is in around mid-April, and it would be a couple of days. Sorry, just the way you said it sounded like in a few days, so I thought I'd just clarify.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for clarifying that.
No problem.
Elise, has anyone dialed in yet?
Through the chair, I can see that Rachel is listening to the meeting, but maybe she has decided not to comment on her temporary use permit, which is an item later on the agenda.
Okay, moving on to correspondence. Are there any items that council would wish to discuss further? Seeing none, we will move on. We have presentations and reports. We have 2021-25 financial plan bylaw, a report from financial services. Over to you, Nyla.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I do have a brief presentation tonight on the 2021 to 2025 financial plan bylaw that has been included in Council's packages today. So I will just take a moment and share my screen. Okay, so this won't be as detailed as a presentation as Council saw at the February 10th and 11th budget meetings. The information remains substantially the same. There were some updates after that special budget meeting, which was presented to Council on March 1st at the third and last special budget meeting. So all the information has remained the same, and the financial plan bylaw has been prepared based on that content. So this won't be a detailed presentation, as I mentioned, but I just wanted to take some time to go over some of the highlights in the 5-year financial plan and then focus on some highlights, particularly on the 2021 budget. So we have included the COVID Restart Grant funds in the 2021 and 2022 budgets, and we have applied some of these Restart Grant funds in the 2020 towards the 2020 financial year. Those grant funds were received to address the fiscal impacts of COVID-19. So the areas that we have allocated the funds to are with respect to pandemic response costs, service areas that saw a reduction in user fees and charges, additional staffing resources in the area of bylaw and public works particularly, and to meet the additional costs associated with implementation of the safety plans at all the public facilities. The 5-year financial plan does include a 2% tax increase per year on the base rate of taxation. That base rate of taxation is used to fund all the various service areas outside of the water and the sewer utility. That 2% tax increase is revisited on an annual basis as we go through the next 5-year financial planning process. The capital and infrastructure levy is being collected at pre-COVID investment levels as decided at a recent council meeting. For the 2021 taxation year, there is a contribution from general surplus to minimize the impact on taxation for that year. And then in 2022 to 2025, we continue with the pre-COVID level of investment, but no contribution from surplus. It is projected that full debt servicing for the wastewater treatment plant will be required by year 2024 if construction is complete, and that will be approximately $896,000 per year. The Tofino Housing Corporation loan guarantee expires in year 2024, so there will be an amount taxed each year until that point, unless, of course, the guarantee falls away prior to that, in which case we will no longer include it in the financial plan. Some highlights on the 2021 budget with respect to revenues. We are collecting 17% of the $20 million required in the 2021 budget from fees and charges. That includes utility fee revenue, which will see a 13% increase on April 1st of this year, and a further 4% increase on January 1st of 2022. The utility rate review will continue by staff throughout 2021 to have a closer look at the rate structure with some recommendations coming back to council before January of next year. There is a development fee increase that's being proposed, and council will consider adoption of those fees later on today's council meeting agenda. And there is a pay parking plan proposed in the 5-year financial plan with some revenue projections as well as expense projections. Any net revenue that is projected currently is being transferred to a reserve fund as we enter our next 5-year financial planning process, which will begin in the summer of 2021. We will have some more discussions on the allocation of those net revenues. Fees and charges are continuing to be reviewed on a regular basis as directed by council a couple of years ago. For taxation, 23% of the budget will come from taxation. The base rate of taxation that we use to fund all of the general service areas outside of water and sewer is being collected at 17% of that amount, equivalent to fees and charges at 17%. Other amounts that make up that 23% are the amounts collected for the capital and infrastructure levy, as well as the housing, the THC loan guarantee, and any other debt servicing requirements. There's no collection of tax for wastewater treatment plant debt in 2021. As we go through the construction phase of the wastewater treatment plant, we will require debt servicing for interest only on the construction loan. We have collected in prior years as we projected construction to begin. Those amounts will be used this year if any construction does take place. The revised assessment roll is still pending, so we can't finalize tax rates at this point, and that means that the non-market change revenue is not finalized at this point, but an estimate has been included in the financial plan bylaw based on the completed assessment roll. So the tax rate bylaw will come forward and be introduced to council in April once we see a finalized revised assessment roll. That those tax amounts will be based on the projected revenues required as indicated in the financial plan bylaw. In addition to those revenues, 25% will be coming of the 20 million required will be coming from grants. So those two amounts at the top, the strategic community investment funds, those are received on an annual basis, and we use those to minimize tax increases. So they go into the general fund and they go towards any of the services we offer outside of water and sewer. The gas tax amount is a regular amount we receive on an annual basis. Those amounts, once received, are transferred to reserve and has to be used based on the eligibility requirements in our agreement. We have various grants coming into the Children's Center to fund the daycare operations. Grants are going towards a housing needs assessment proposed, as well as various recreation programming grants. We have a grant planned for the emergency response building, not yet approved. So this is probably a good time to mention that grants included in the financial plan aren't necessarily all approved yet, but if we do plan to, or we have applied for grants that are pending approval, we are required to include them in the financial plan. We have some emergency planning grants, some of which have been approved yet and some are pending. And then we have a grant for Campbell Street Phase 3. 19% of the revenues are coming from reserves. So we start to see over the next 5 years, the more use of the capital and infrastructure levy amounts. So over the next 5 years, we are going to see those amounts being used for asset management with respect to condition assessments and capital planning. So we can begin to have a better idea of our asset inventory. We know we have a certain amount of information now, but we will be working over the next 3 years in particular to gain some more information on our asset inventory, and we'll be able to better plan for our investment levels in the future. We do plan to use some infrastructure levy amounts for road improvements over the next year in the 2021 budget, as well as over the 4 years after, and some parking lot improvements. Development cost charges are proposed to be used to expand storm sewer sidewalks and flow monitoring and telemetry upgrades in the water system. We've also applied some general surplus reserves, as well as resort municipality initiative funds. So these two funding sources typically fund all the capital projects that are being proposed over the next 5 years. These are amounts related to the 2021 budget. The details of those projects can be found on our website and in previous agenda packages, particularly the February 10th and 11th budget meeting. Our expenditures, the $20 million, is separated into 3 different categories. We have our operating budget, which makes up 45% of the budget, 36% goes to capital, and 18% relates to transfers, and that's transfers to reserves or transfers to other agencies such as the municipal and regional district tax. So in addition to those larger 4 sources of revenue, the grants, reserve funds, user fees and charges, and taxation, we also have contribution amounts that come in that are just under 10%. That's that municipal and regional district tax amount or any donations that we will receive. The capital and infrastructure levy that is being brought in to transfer out to make up some of that transfer amount we just saw on the previous slide. If there are surpluses from prior years or amounts that we've taxed for in prior years and we didn't carry out those projects, we have an opportunity to bring those forward. So that makes up some of that surplus amount we're seeing there, just under about 3% of the budget. The restart grant funds that I talked about earlier are coming into the 2021 budget, a portion of them. There are some amounts from borrowing that we are projecting for beginning construction of the wastewater treatment plant, and then a small amount for debt servicing. And we don't have a lot of debt to service currently. Mostly that relates to water system. So a long-term debt related to the water system. Allocation of property tax revenue is looking fairly consistent with prior years. Not surprising to see the largest allocation going to public works and administration. Public works because we see the most material expenses related to some of our larger asset categories such as roads and drainage and some other capital projects. In administration, that's where we house a lot of our staffing and organizational costs that support all of the service areas. In public spaces, the parks function is sitting in there, and that's where those tax dollars are going towards. Fire services and planning are consistent with prior years, as well as the council budget. Contingency is set at 180,000 for 2021, and those are for those unexpected expenditures that will come up, or if we do not collect the amount of revenue that we projected, some of those contingency funds can be used to carry out some of the expenditures that we have planned for in the year. Emergency planning, there's that service area, as well as recreation and bylaw are all funded a portion by taxation, in addition to user fees and charges. So as I mentioned previously, more detailed information can be found on our website. The most of our information is sitting right now on our public consultation platform that we did use over the last couple of months. We are going to be moving all the approved and adopted information over to our website, which will include presentations from the November, February, and March special budget meetings. There will be resources and guides available on there, such as videos from BC Assessment and all of the financial plan documents in detail, and also in a consolidated basis. We always accept comments through our budget@tofino.ca email address. And of course, we are working on the 2021 tax guide that will be sent out in a similar format that we saw in 2020. That concludes my presentation today. Staff is recommending first 3 readings and adoption of the financial plan bylaw. The ministerial order continues to be in place, which allows us to consider adoption at the same meeting as 3rd reading for all financial bylaws, and that includes this one today.
Thank you, Nyla. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Steer.
Well, not a question per se, but a comment just to thank all of staff, and particularly financial services and the CFO. I'm starting to realize over the last couple of years the immense amount of work that goes into creating this financial plan. And I just wanted to thank once again the CFO for bringing this information, this complex information, and making it accessible to council so that we can make the decisions that we have to make. And once again, I just commend staff, and particularly Financial Services Department for their work on this.
Thank you, Councillor Steer, for getting educated. Any further questions? Councillor Anderson.
I'd like to sort of echo Councillor Steer's comments, but just point out, I believe this is the earliest ever that we've adopted a financial plan. So it really speaks to the work that's been done, and the quality of work as well. So congratulations to everyone that worked on it, and thanks.
Okay, if there's no further questions, would somebody like to move the recommendation?
Sure, I'll move it, but just quickly, Councillor McMaster, sorry, Acting Mayor McMaster, do you know that your video's off? I'm just wondering for quorum if that makes a difference. There you go.
It's the haircut.
Okay. Yeah. I will move that the District of Tofino, am I on the right one? Yeah, 2021 to 2025 financial bylaw number 1306/2021 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time.
And I'll second.
Second by Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? And call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion is carried.
Okay, I'll move the District of Tofino to 2021 to 2025 financial bylaw number 1306, 2021 be adopted.
Have a seconder?
I'll second again.
Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion is carried. Thank you very much, Nyla. Moving on to item 8.2, Official Community Plan Bylaws 2021, a report from the Manager of Community Sustainability. Over to you, Aaron.
Thank you. I'll just be with you 1 second. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Great. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Today, I will be presenting the last presentation for the 2021 Official Community Plan. It is somewhat of an underwhelming presentation, but something that I'm proud is underwhelming. I think we've, as a community, managed to meet the goals and the expectations in the development of this document. The OCP process, we moved through this over the past 3.5 years. We've finalized step 5 in the last month or so with the completion tonight, hopefully. The background, I won't go through this fairly long list, but in January 2021, we received first reading of the bylaw, and on February 23rd, had a public hearing. We've reviewed the plan for consistency with the financial plan. It is consistent with the 2021 to 2025 financial plan. And we also received some recommendations from the finance department about some ideas for the next iteration of the plan that we'll be reviewing in about 2 years. We also reviewed the plan in the context of our waste management plan and the ACRD's waste management plan, and the OCP does line up with that plan as well. We had a public hearing on February 23rd. We received no written representations. We had one speaker from Mckenzie Beach Resort, Mr. Ryan Cohen, who spoke about his property and the current zoning and OCP designations. We also adopted a number of supporting bylaws at the previous council meeting on the 26th, including a zoning amendment bylaw, a development approval procedures bylaw, the delegation of council authority bylaw, a development approval information area bylaw, and the fees and charges bylaw. All of those are coming forward to council today as well for final reading. The delegation of council authority bylaw, there was an error made, and that will come into council at the next meeting for final reading, along with an MTI bylaw, which wasn't ready originally on the January 26th, but is in front of council today, further down the agenda. The MTI and bylaw notice amendment will be new to council, and the intent of this amendment is to encourage compliance with development permit guidelines, the requirement to first obtain a development permit and then also to follow the guidelines. There is one minor correction at second reading, and that is on our proposed land use map. It was written as town rather than village. And we've amended that to reflect the rest of the OCP, which is village. So on that map, you'll see we've changed town to village. Our monitoring process of the OCP is going to be taking place starting next week. We're working with a local organization, the Tla-o-qui-aht Biosphere Trust, to develop a framework for monitoring, and we're budgeted to do so this year and next, and then again in 2023, and then moving forward over the next 5 years. That'll be a standard budget item to make sure that we're monitoring our indicators of the OCP to ensure that we can update it and hopefully achieve the goals within that plan. And this is the end. I'd like to take any questions or have any comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Any questions for Aaron? Councillor Chalmers.
I'll give the comment that, Aaron, thank you so much for all the work you've done. It's been a process. It's been incredibly interesting to watch and learn, and it's very exciting that it's coming to fruition.
Thank you. Councillor Steer.
Well, thank you, Aaron, and I'll echo, of course, Councillor Chalmers said, and the tremendous amount of work that's gone on to this. And one of the exciting things that I think for me was, as you just in the last slides there, was that active monitoring component that's going to be incorporated into this OCP, and I think there's great value in that. Looking forward to see if that framework. I'm looking forward to see if that framework is to be used. Monitoring how that will be used to adjust and maybe set additional goals down into the future. And I'm glad to see that it is incorporated into the budget process. I just had one little quick comment on the ACRD waste management plan, as the people at the ACRD think I'm obsessed with it, but it is going to be, it is 2007, and there's we've had a lot of discussion around how that is quite outdated and does need a revision and review, and that will be coming up. I say the near future, but I don't know what that means. But that will be there. But the core objectives that I think the OCP aligns with that waste management. Those core objectives I think will remain the same. As just the devil in the details within that plan. But I just thought I'd point that out. Thank you so much, and I'll be quiet now.
If there's no further comment, would somebody like to move the recommendations?
I'll do
Sure.
that.
Go, Councillor.
Councillor Anderson.
Oh, you're going to, okay. I will move the recommendation that the District of Tofino, pardon me, I'm on the wrong line here. I'll move that Schedule A, proposed land use in District of Tofino official community plan bylaw number 1290, 2021 be amended by replacing the word town with the word village in the legend to ensure consistency throughout the bylaw, and that the District of Tofino official community plan bylaw number 1290, 2021 be read a second time as amended.
Have a seconder? Councillor Steer. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion is carried. Carry on, Councillor Anderson.
Okay, I'll continue then and I'll move that the District of Tofino official community plan bylaw number 1290, 2021 be read a third time.
Have a seconder? Councillor Chalmers. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion is carried.
And now the motion that Aaron has long been awaiting. I'll move that the District of Tofino official community plan bylaw number 1290, 2021 be adopted.
Have a seconder. Councillor Steer. Any further discussion at your own peril? Seeing none, all those in favour? None opposed. Motion is carried.
Further recommendation I'll move that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1299, 2021 be read a third time.
Seconder, Councillor Chalmers. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion carried.
And I'll move that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1299, 2021 be adopted.
Seconder, Councillor Chalmers. Any discussion? Call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion carried.
Further recommendations, and I'll move that the District of Tofino delegation of council authority amendment bylaw number 1237.03 2021 be read a first, second, and third time.
And a seconder, Councillor Chalmers. Any discussion? Call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion is carried.
And I'll move that the District of Tofino fees and charges bylaw number 1271.4 2021 be adopted.
A seconder, Councillor Chalmers. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried. I believe you missed one before you carry on.
The development approval information area bylaw.
That's the one.
Okay, I'll move that then. That the District of Tofino development approval information area bylaw number 1300 2021 be adopted.
Seconder, Councillor Chalmers. Call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion is carried. And now going to the last one.
And the final one, and I'll move that the District of Tofino development approval procedures bylaw number 1301 2021 be adopted.
Seconder, Councillor Chalmers. Any discussion? Call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion is carried. Thank you very much, Aaron, and well done, Councillor Anderson. Just 1 point deducted for a slip up there.
Thanks for picking up on that.
Moving on to item 8.3, MTI and bylaw notice amendment report from community sustainability. Aaron again.
Okay, let's share my screen. This is a very short presentation. So today I have the pleasure of introducing the 2021 MTI and bylaw notice amendment for first, second, and third reading. This amendment is intended to be a companion bylaw to the 2021 OCP and is intended to be a development permit compliance tool. So just another tool in our toolbox to ensure that the goals of the OCP and the community wishes are respected. There's actually two bylaws. There's the MTI and the bylaw notice bylaw. Both of them have the same requirements that you must obtain. If you fail to obtain a development permit, you could be subject to certain fines, and you also have to follow conditions in a development permit as well. It will support important environmental protection policies, hopefully improve our compliance rate. Currently, the alternative is the status quo is recourse through the court. So if someone does something against the guidelines of the development permit, our only ability right now is to just take that person to court. We have fines in the bylaw notice will be the maximum fine will be $500, and in the MTI bylaw will be $2,000. And that's it for the MTI bylaw. Does the council have any questions?
Any questions for Aaron? Councillor Steer.
Thank you, Aaron. Just a quick question, and just looking at the carrot and the stick approach, and this is one of the tools in the toolbox. I was just, in terms of the compliance ability, the one thing that struck me was that, and I'm sure you've looked at and thought about it in detail, was the level of fine, especially in the bylaw notice at that 500 level. I'm assuming this is what you think is appropriate. I'm just wondering if that is enough of a potential deterrent, and what maybe the thought behind the amounts in both of them, but maybe a little background, because it seemed low to me, but it just seemed like for some, it potentially could just be a cost of doing business and proceeding without the compliance that we're ultimately looking for.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Both of those fines are actually quite high in terms of our bylaw fine. So $500 in the bylaw notice is a significant fine, and as well the $2,000 in the MTI bylaw. So and there are maximum limits to what we can actually charge in both those bylaws. And I believe I have to check in with the manager of protective services, but I believe $500 is our maximum fine available in under our MTI bylaw. It's our hope that we won't ever have to use these tools, and I have to say that for the most part, 90% of the time, the community respects the development permit guidelines and does a really good job in following those guidelines. Once in a while, it'd be nice to be able to have this, just to have a quick conversation with someone prior to, you know, an old growth tree getting cut down, or, you know, a swath of forest being removed. Hopefully people don't see it as a cost of doing business. That would be unfortunate.
Thank you, Aaron. Any further questions? Seeing none, I'll move from the chair that the District of Tofino MTI and bylaw notice amendment bylaw number 1107.14 2021 be read a first, second, and third time. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Chalmers. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed, motion is carried. Thank you, Aaron. I think you're still on. Moving on to item 8.4, Building Bylaw Amendment Step Code 2.
Thank you. I believe Nicholas Henderson will be presenting this report.
Welcome, Nicholas.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I will just share my screen. There we go. This afternoon, I'm happy to present the building bylaw amendment, hoping to adopt Step Code 2 of the BC Energy Step Code. This will be a short presentation, but I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end. Back in 2019, the District of Tofino adopted a policy outlining a timeline for the adoption of the BC Energy Step Code. January 31st of last year, we adopted Step 1, and our intent was to adopt Step 2 no later than January 31st of this year. We're a little bit late, but nevertheless, we're moving forward. The roadmap is to adopt Step 3 no later than January 31st of 2022, which will be in line with the province when they basically roll out mandatory Step 3 across BC. So it will no longer be a voluntary program. It'll be enforced as part of the base building code. So we would hope to line up with them. Just a refresher on Energy Step Code. It's basically all about energy efficiency in buildings. It is a performance-based approach as opposed to a prescriptive approach. So instead of looking to the building code to tell you how much insulation you need to have in your floors, ceilings, and roof assemblies, and wall assemblies, the Step Code basically just dictates a set of metrics that you hope to achieve. It allows for much more flexibility in design. So if builders and owners wish to have less insulation value in one part of the house, perhaps because they have a view wall, then they can do that as long as they make up for it somewhere else. It also prescribes metrics for mechanical use intensity and air loss. The next two slides just kind of describe the roadmap for Step Code. Step 1 was basically trying to achieve homes that are about the same as the prescriptive code was asking for over the last decade or so. Step 2, what we're trying to adopt this evening is will be about 10% more efficient than that kind of basic building. Next slide pertains to Part 3 buildings. We don't get a whole lot of Part 3 buildings in Tofino. The Hotel Z would be an example of one. Basically any hotel, large commercial building. It works slightly differently than the residential step code, which has 5 steps. The Part 3 step code only has 4. That said, step 2 was what we're adopting for both part 9 and part 3 buildings. And that concludes my short presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions, Council? If there's no questions, would somebody like to move the recommendation?
Sure. I will move that the District of Tofino Building Bylaw Amendment Number 1256.02 2021 attached as Appendix 1 to the staff report dated March 9th, 2021 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time.
Have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Steer. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed, motion is carried. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Councillor and Mayor.
Item 8.5, temporary use permit, Berry 615 Camel Street. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'll be sharing my screen for a brief presentation here. All right, so we should be looking at the introductory slide for a presentation related to the application for a temporary use permit for the property at 615 Campbell Street. The location of the subject property is on the corner of Campbell Street and Lone Cone Road. Currently, it's used as a guest house. It's actually a zoned residential, so it's operating under a bed and breakfast license, but works primarily as a guest house for a local charter fishing operation. The applicant has requested a 3-year temporary use permit. The purpose of the TUP is to allow a veterinary clinic to operate within the existing structure on the subject property. My understanding is that the veterinary clinic would be operating on the lower floor. The upper floor would still maintain its residences, or it would be maintained as a residential area. Those suites on the upper floor would likely be used to attract locum veterinarians and other staff of the veterinary clinic. The applicant does intend to rezone the property to allow the use permanently. However, this process can be a little bit lengthy, and so in order to get the clinic up and running, they've requested a temporary use permit to do so a little bit faster. Temporary use permit, I'm not sure if we've talked about one of these for 6 to 8 months or so. So just a little bit of background, it's essentially a tool that allows a short-term use that does not comply with the existing zoning for the property. So it can be issued for a maximum of 3 years and then can be renewed once for an additional 3 years. And really it's intended to be a temporary solution to a particular situation and is not a long-term land use solution. That being said, they often are bridges between temporary solutions and long-term land use solutions, as is the case here. So within the OCP, the property was up until about 15 minutes ago designated in the Tla-o-qui-aht View Estates area of the OCP. It will be now in the village designation. This area is intended for commercial activities, institutional activities, sort of high density residential development within Tofino. And staff don't feel that the proposal contravenes any of these OCP policies. So we have a sort of a matrix that we use to kind of examine these temporary use permits to maintain a little bit of consistency while staff are evaluating the applications. Regarding short-term economic activities, the applicant has requested the TUP in order to open the veterinary clinic. And this veterinary clinic will enable some short-term economic activities on the property. Ensure long-term public policy for the area is not changed. In general, the proposed use commercial, it'll actually be kind of a mixed use structure eventually, is generally aligned with OCP policy, and staff don't feel that the proposed TUP will change the public policy for the area. Regarding environmental impacts, the subject property has long been developed. It's been significantly cleared and landscaped, and there are no environmental development permit areas that impact the property. So staff are of the opinion that environmental impacts will be very minimal related to the proposed TUP. Balancing the public and private interests, there will be the provision of a useful service through this TUP to the town, and there will be financial gain to the applicant through this TUP and through the opening of the clinic. And then regarding compatibility with the surrounding developments, many of the properties along Campbell Street in that area have commercial elements that are permitted and are currently active. So there is also not a major change proposed to the physical appearance of the property. At the moment, staff's understanding is that the applicant may enlarge some of the parking areas, as well as enlarge the entrance a little bit to the property a little bit, but it's not anticipated that there will be significant structural changes to the building on the property. So regarding the notification process, the actual notifications were sent out on February 26th, and they were actually published in the Westerly on March 3rd. There was one email that was received by staff that was in favor of the application, and one phone call that was received that was just looking for some information. We received no comments that were not in favor of the application. The options for this application today would be to approve the permit as amended, deny the permit, or defer, otherwise deal with the permit. And staff are currently recommending the first option. If there are any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer. Otherwise, that's the end of the presentation.
Any questions for Peter? I have a question, Peter. Will animals be allowed to be boarded overnight or for a period of time?
No, that's not something that will be permitted on the property. So after speaking with the applicant, they've indicated that at this time, they don't feel that the space is adequate to board animals overnight. That may be something that comes up through a rezoning application, at which time we'll probably have a little bit more consideration for that. But at the moment, they're just looking to do some minor renovations and begin using the space as a veterinary clinic. But they are not offering boarding services at this point.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Anderson.
I guess it's a bit of an off the wall question, but I'm just wondering if animals are sort of limited to domestic house kind of animals, or I mean, I don't expect that there would be much else other than that, but I suppose some larger animals would be part of a veterinary service that might cause problems. So has that been thought of? Or does it need to be?
That's a good question. My understanding from speaking with the applicant and from their application is that they intend to primarily work with smaller animals and probably domestic animals. I don't think there's any considerations for or desire to kind of act as a wildlife veterinary hospital, though I would imagine that's probably not out of the question in an emergency situation. And I think any larger animals such as horses or cows or kind of larger, I guess, domestic, but maybe more farm-oriented animals may also receive treatment from the vet, but I would imagine that the vet would be happy to go to the properties where those animals are kept. Currently, the veterinarian is operating within Tofino, but relying primarily on house calls. And I believe that this clinic would be primarily for smaller domestic pets, likely cats and dogs primarily.
Any further questions, Peter? Councillor Steer.
I would just, if no other questions, I'll read the motion. He has come out to do house visits for my chickens, so I do know he will come out and do that, Councillor Anderson, if necessary. I will move. Let me find the right one here. There we are. That the staff be authorized to approve the temporary use permit attached as Appendix 1 to the staff report titled Temporary Use Permit Barry 615 Campbell Street dated March 9th, 2021 for a period of 3 years.
Have a seconder, Councillor Chalmers. Any further discussion? Okay, calling the vote. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion is carried. Moving on to item 8.6. Temporary use permit, Korea 765 Ocean Park Drive.
So this is another temporary use permit application. I'll be sharing my screen for. right, so this particular temporary use permit is for the property at 765 Ocean Park Drive. The location is within the Ocean Park neighborhood. It's one of the corner lots towards the southern area of the neighborhood. The applicant has requested a 3-year temporary use permit. Essentially, the TUP would allow long-term camping in one trailer on the subject property. This would be a fifth wheel style trailer. The occupants of the trailer would be limited to the owner of the property and immediate family. Would not be permitted for short-term rentals or long-term rental to anyone, or basically no one other than the owner and immediate family would be permitted to reside within the unit. The RV would be hooked up to district sewer and water via the infrastructure associated with the Ocean Park strata. So again, TUPs, a tool to allow the short-term use that doesn't comply with the zoning bylaw, can be issued for 3 years and are really intended to be temporary in nature, not a long-term land use solution. Staff would note with this one, this is likely not going to be a bridge to a long-term land use. The property was recently designated as Mckenzie Neighborhood. It is now within the peninsula designation of the OCP. This area is intended primarily for lower density residential development with some small accessory commercial elements. Staff are of the opinion that the proposal does not contravene OCP policy. Again, looking at our matrix to evaluate these types of applications, providing for short-term economic activities. Essentially, the TUP will allow the applicant to live on the property for up to 3 years while preparing to construct a dwelling on the property. It's staff's understanding that the applicant does intend to build on the property, however, is currently managing some personal matters and is expecting to be up to a couple of years before they're actually able to build on the property. So they've requested to have this TUP for up to 3 years to allow the trailer to be located on the property while they live in it, and also sort out their personal affairs and prepare to construct the actual building that that will conform to the code and conform to the zoning bylaw for the area. Public policy in the area. So the nature of the proposed use is really aligned with OCP policy, and the use, it's essentially long-term residential use, won't result in a substantial change in the neighborhood during the period of the TUP. However, again, staff want to reiterate that this is going to be a temporary use, and it's not intended to be a bridge to any sort of a rezoning or long-term use. Environmental impacts, the property is cleared and has been surrounded by existing residential developments. There's no environmental development permit areas that affect the property or the area around, and so staff do not anticipate any negative environmental impacts from this temporary use permit. Balancing public and private interests, really the primary interest being served here is providing a resident of Tofino a long-term place to live while they prepare to construct their house on the property. However, there's not a significant public interest that's being compromised. Staff have included some conditions within the TUP that would require some screening for the unit, as though the use is not out of order for the area. The actual character of the structure is certainly different from what exists in that part of the neighborhood. And that also kind of plays into the compatibility of the surrounding developments. In order to mitigate the impacts of this kind of change of character of residential use, staff have included some conditions related to screening and have essentially presented the applicant with an option to either kind of screen or side the unit with some sort of a natural material, or else construct a fence that will essentially screen the trailer unit from neighboring properties. So servicing the RV will be connected to district sewer and water. Upon recommendation from the district building inspector, we will be requesting that a registered plumber actually perform the hookups of the servicing. Often with these types of temporary use permits, we recommend that a housing agreement be associated with them. Staff do not feel that this is appropriate in this case. The TUP will only permit the owner of the property to live in the trailer, and so this isn't a rental or a kind of commercial gain situation, and so a housing agreement does not seem necessary in this case. And the notification was sent out on February 26th to neighboring properties and was published in the Westerly News on March 3rd. There were 3 emails that were received by staff. They were not significantly opposed, but they had some concerns regarding the TUP, primarily with the length of the proposed permit. I think there was some concern that the applicant would reside in the unit for up to 3 years and potentially look to renew the temporary use permit, or would then go through the process of pulling a building permit. Once there's an active building permit for a lot, through the zoning bylaw, you are permitted to live within a trailer or an RV on that lot while you are actively constructing your building. So there's some concern from the neighborhood that the requested permit would be too long. There's also been some concern about the continued use of the lots for storage of various materials over the years in contravention of strata bylaws. It's worth noting that strata bylaws are the responsibility of the strata corporation and not the responsibility of the district. However, we do have bylaws related to unsightly premises. There was also some concern of sort of expansion of the camping use, whether or not there would be additional trailers or additional temporary storage units placed on the lot, as well as the visual character of the camping use. So staff have included some conditions in the TUP, though acknowledged that some of the concerns that were raised after the TUP was kind of drafted and put as part of this agenda, particularly with regards to the length of the proposed permit. The options, same as the previous application, approve the permit, or we could approve the permit as amended, denying the permit or deferring, otherwise dealing with the permit, are also options. Staff are currently recommending the first option, though do appreciate the concerns that have been raised by the strata as well as neighboring properties regarding the overall potential length of the use of the lot for essentially long-term camping. So that's the end of the presentation, and if there's any questions or comments at this point, I'd be happy to speak to those.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions of Peter? Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Peter, and appreciate. We just got those correspondences late in the day as well, so just had a brief overview of the correspondences this afternoon. I did have a couple of questions about the conditions that we might be able to include in that TUP that might, well, one of them is, for me, is a safety component. One of the things that I would be concerned about is not knowing what the RV or the type of camping unit that might be there. Is there a condition within the TUP where we can ask for an inspection from protective services to ensure that fire and safety parameters around the dwelling are met, and that concern for the occupants in the neighborhood, that from a fire safety perspective?
That's an interesting and good point that you bring up. This has been kind of a significant point of discussion for a variety of these similar TUPs and ongoing applications within the District of Tofino between staff. I would say the conclusion that staff have currently arrived at is that we're hesitant to provide assurances from the District of Tofino that a particular unit is safe for long-term habitation, as that may open up the district to significant liability. These units, RVs, fifth wheels, those kinds of things, they're not designed for long-term habitation. So we have essentially permitted these types of units to be used for long-term habitation. However, these are the way that we've described them is as campsites. And so these aren't structures that meet BC building code. These aren't structures that have the same level of fire protection as a standard stick frame house with drywall and other fire separation elements. So it's challenging for the district to go into these units and say, this is appropriate and this is not, because we really have no matrix to understand what would be considered appropriate and what would not be considered appropriate. We do recommend in all these units that they have things like sort of standard safety features such as carbon monoxide detectors, as well as various fire suppression devices on recommendation of the District of Tofino Fire Chief. However, staff are uncomfortable with certifying a particular unit as safe for occupancy, as it opens the district up to significant liability, and there is no way that these units will be able to meet the BC building code in any way.
And thank you, Peter. And just a follow-up. in terms of the condition of the TUP. One of the things I think is the concern is the length of time, and I'm wondering if within the conditions that the district could place on the TUP is if there's movement towards a building permit. So for example, I know that there might be geotechnical or surveys that might be required. So is there conditions possibly to apply to the TUP that would in essence motivate the applicant to be actively moving towards that building permit phase, to show within that TUP that we're putting conditions that would ensure that they are moving in that direction? Does that make sense?
Yeah, certainly. I think the primary way to do that would be to essentially reduce the proposed time period for the TUP. Once an applicant has an active building permit, they've submitted a building permit application, and the building inspector has issued their building permit, they are permitted to live on the subject property in an RV or a trailer or whatever it is while they're actively constructing it. The idea of active construction isn't specifically defined, but it's generally at the discretion of the building inspector. If he says, okay, it looks like you're continuing to move towards building this, it's not just that you got a lift of 2x4s dropped on the property 6 years ago and you're still living in the trailer kind of thing. Though that would kind of provide a little bit of impetus, I would believe, for the applicant to at least move into the design phase and apply to get a building permit and somewhat actively move towards that. I have had conversations with the applicant. Initially, I recommended more of a 1 or 2 year TUP. However, upon further conversation, the applicant indicated that they may need a little bit more time than that due to the personal situation that they had found themselves in. So they decided to apply for a 3 year TUP. I would note that the applicant was of the understanding that they may not be granted a 3 year TUP, that staff or that council may be more comfortable with a 1 or a 2 year TUP. So the applicant is aware of that, but they decided as it was in their best interest to apply for a 3 year TUP.
Thank you.
Councillor Chalmers.
Thank you. I had the same question as Councillor Steer, but I just want to elaborate a little bit more because I was thinking the same things along as the length of time, as well as when you take into account that they can potentially apply again. So then we're looking at 6 years and then getting a development permit, and that could extend to the development stage. And if I appreciate what you actually just said, so it kind of helps me understand a little bit more, but if we were potentially to look at a shorter TUP, like a 1 or 2 year, with the idea that they then can, it gives that motivation to get moving, and then they could potentially apply for that second TUP. And I just wanted your thoughts on that. Is it 6-1, 6.5 dozen the other, or would, from your perspective, would help, right?
Yes, certainly. So TUPs are renewed at the discretion of council. So say, for example, that this 3 year TUP is granted, and at the end of 3 years, it seems like the applicant has made no motion towards designing or moving towards a building permit. Council may say, well, you've had 3 years to do that, and so at this point, we're not interested in renewing the TUP. However, if council were to grant a 1 or 2 year TUP, and it turns out that after 2 years, say the applicant is almost ready and they can bring forward some indication that they have some plans or some significant forward momentum. However, they've just been, unable to pull the building permit at that point, then council may be more interested in renewing the TUP. At that point, I would say, based on our conversation, if council is concerned about the potential for 3 years to lapse and then the applicant to simply come back for a renewal of the TUP and look for another 3 years to sort of prepare to build this structure, the most elegant solution would probably be to reduce the term of the TUP to a year, 2 years, or any time in between that. A TUP doesn't have to be for a specific year; it could be for 358 days, or there's not a specific time limit that it has to be. So if council is comfortable with 1.5 years or 2 years, that I'm sure would be a little bit more motivation to the applicant, for example, and maybe will lower some of the neighbors' concerns as well. in staff's opinion, that would probably be the most straightforward way, and could be an easy amendment to the permit as it has been presented.
When it comes to TUPs, I'm all in favour of motivation. My experience when we've dealt with TUPs is it's very hard not to say yes to a renewal. I've yet to see a TUP not be renewed. So for me, I'd be in favour of a shorter TUP, and then I'd maybe renew it. Whereas if I voted in favour of a 3-year one, and if I was on council when it came up for renewal, I'd find it very hard to vote for renewal then. Councillor Anderson, you want to say something?
Yeah, I had a question just about when the TUP would actually start. Would it be at the time that they actually located there and then met all the conditions, or would it start the moment council granted it? Should they do that? My question, sorry, it may take some time for them to meet the conditions, so I'm just wondering if it was a year or 2 year or 3 year, whatever council decides, when does that actual term of the temporary use permit start?
So typically, staff have been actually discussing this with legal counsel as to when the term of TUP officially starts. We have previously held off issuing a TUP, so the TUP will be approved by council and staff will hold off issuing the TUP in order to allow the applicant a bit of time to get whatever it is together that they need to get together. So for example, if it was a business they were running and they wanted to take advantage of the entire term of the TUP, we may hold off issuing it for a couple months while they got their inventory in order or any renovations they needed to do done. However, there have been some issues with that, particularly regarding properties that have ongoing uses that have then applied for a TUP to legitimize that use. They have very little motivation to meet the requirements. If staff are saying things like, okay, well, once you meet the particular requirements of the TUP, then we'll issue the TUP and then the clock starts ticking. There's little motivation for the applicant at that point to meet the requirements because the longer they don't meet the requirements, essentially the more time they get on their TUP. So for example, with this TUP and probably most TUPs going forward, staff have not simply said the TUP will be valid for 3 years from the time it is issued. Staff have actually included hard end dates on the TUP, and they're typically based on the date of assumed approval by council. So for example, this TUP, I believe the end date that as it has been drafted is March 8th of 2024, which is 3 years from today. So you are correct in that it may take a little bit of time for the applicant to purchase the unit and move it on and hook it up. However, staff have found that, again, with TUPs, they tend to function more effectively if there are hard time limits associated with them to issue them, for them to be done, as well as for any conditions associated to be met. And so, for example, for other TUPs that may have housing agreements associated with them, we may grant a 6-week kind of grace period where we are working through the process of adopting the housing agreement. However, in this case, because there is no housing agreement, staff are hesitant to hold off the issuance of the TUP for too long, as again, it may turn into an addition of 6 months to a year before the actual TUP is issued and the clock starts.
Councillor Chalmers.
I agree with what you said, Councillor McMaster, and I'm definitely leaning to being a bit more comfortable with something like a 2-year TUP that you're then looking at kind of a 4-year longer period versus that 6. I think it's kind of what the neighbors are thinking, and I think there's enough motivation in there to get moving with a leeway to allow them to get their personal things straight. To hear what the rest of council thinks on that.
How does the rest of council feel going for a 2-year TUP? Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, that's why I asked that. My question, because I think, if part of if we went with a 1 year, I think that wouldn't be enough time because by the time they get set up, they'll probably only have, you know, maybe 9 months or something like that there, or 9 or 10. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think I'm most comfortable with the 2-year time frame, 2-year permit.
Councillor Steer, any comments?
No, I mean, I've listened to the rest of council, and I would concur with or move along with the rest of council for a 2-year time frame.
Okay, I'll move from the chair, unless there's any further discussion, that staff be authorised to approve the temporary use permit attached as Appendix 1 to the staff report, temporary use permit, Korea 765 Ocean Park Drive, dated March 9, 2021, for a period of 2 years. Have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion?
Yep.
Councillor Steer.
Yeah, Acting Mayor McMaster. Yeah, I just also, I mean, maybe for staff that that to the applicant that the ability to reapply is still within their purview, and that is something that I think should be communicated in case the understanding of the TUP process might be a little muddled for some.
Certainly, I'll make sure that they're aware.
Okay. Any further comments? Okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion is carried. Before moving on to item 8.7, Elise, I believe Rachel Sutton wants to speak.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm just going to unmute Rachel Sutton. If actually, seeing as this is not the time typically for public comment, I might ask for a motion to allow Rachel Sutton to speak to her application for a time up to 2 minutes. She was unable to use the public comment period just due to some technical difficulties.
Okay, I'll move from the chair that Rachel Sutton be allowed to speak for 2 minutes due to technical difficulties during the public comment period. Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Councillor Chalmers. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion carried.
Thank you. I'm just going to unmute Rachel. Rachel will have 2 minutes to speak once you start speaking to council.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
A little bit. Can you speak a bit louder?
Sure. Can you hear me better now?
That's great.
Okay, I'm going to give you my best. Can you see me or just hear me?
I can just hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much for including me in the meeting. This is fascinating. I'm definitely coming to more meetings. I prepared a mini speech because I think what we're about to talk about is actually really pivotal right now. Thank you so much for hearing me out. As most of you do know, I'm a mom, I'm a yoga teacher and a naturopath in this area. They're not practicing at this time. I've worked with a young person with autism in this community very extensively. I've set up and purchased and run the space to run a licensed daycare for 5 years. Most recently, I found the most lucrative and solid way to exist in Tla-o-qui-aht Sound is to be a vacation rental owner. So usually I do that with pride. I love it. I love the people who come. We have a ball. I do parent 90% solo, and I'm the primary breadwinner in my home. I'm so grateful for the support of this community, which I see at every turn, and I really want to stress how grateful I am for that. During the onset of COVID, I had to think quickly, and I made a choice that I'm not really proud of. I have subsequently written a very detailed and sincere letter of apology and presented chocolates. I went to long-term rentals on my property to try to avoid bringing a deadly virus to the south end of Tofino in Cox Bay, where my property is. I didn't understand how important the TAP process is. I didn't understand how it would impact this area and my community. And that was a really big oversight on my part. Now I've learned how important it is, and I'm really actually very in support of having a valid TAP. I did draw a beautiful picture for you that you can't see, but it was a diagram of my land. And in recognizing that this region, Tla-o-qui-aht Sound in Tofino, is home to many geniuses, I think we cannot dance aside from the fact that we have an irreverent edge here. And sometimes that's really fun and great. And, you know, for my end, I use it for comedy. I take it into yoga with me for sure. It can be actually very dangerous and unsettling. So I've asked Peter if he'll present to you that I could be granted just one single tap on my property for one single tiny home that would be sleeping 2 people. I would be okay with it being refused. It's not my primary source of income. It brings me hardly any money. It's specific to the 2 people that I like, that I would like to have living there. They contribute a huge amount to our community.
Rachel, this is Elise speaking. You've passed your 2 minutes, so I'm just going to ask you to conclude your statements at this time.
Okay, the last things I was going to say is that I currently have someone on my land who's gone ahead to build an illegal cabin without my consent and refuses to leave my land and is quite terrifying. I have another person who once presented with a lease that is then not legal because the tiny home he's living in is not legal, shared with me that he was in heroin and cocaine trafficking for 6 years. So my message is, I cannot solve the Tofino housing crisis. I would be happy to have one tap if it works for you. I need to really own that I'd like to do this with you safely, and I'd like to be as transparent as possible going forward. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to put you back in the muted section of the meeting. Councillor McMaster, you are muted.
Moving on to item 8.7. Temporary use permit, Sutton 1430 Pacific Rim Highway. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks. So I'll be sharing my screen for this as well. Okay, so this is our third consideration of a temporary use permit. This would be for the property at 1430 Pacific Rim Highway. And we just heard from the applicant at the sort of the late edition of the public comment. The property is located, accessed off of Pacific Rim Highway. It's located approximately behind the Tourism Tofino office across from Cox Bay. The applicant has requested a 3-year temporary use permit. The temporary use permit would allow long-term camping in a trailer on the subject property. This TUP would be limited to 1 trailer, and it would be limited through a housing agreement to a particular type of resident. So it will be rented long-term for a monthly fee, but it will not be permitted to be used for short-term rentals. The RV, and I call it an RV, but my understanding is it's more of what's colloquially termed a tiny home. So essentially a custom-built 5th wheel on a flatbed trailer. Will be hooked up to district sewer and water via the private infrastructure that the strata lot is actually part of. So I believe it's the 3 lots that are accessed off of that driveway off of the highway are actually all part of a strata subdivision. So they have private services that provide the properties with sewer and water access. I've read this out a few times, but just so council are aware, basically the temporary use permit is just a short-term tool that allows us to grant a permission for a use on a subject property that is not permitted by zoning. So it's the same as a zoning amendment. However, it's for a limited amount of time. The property is now within the peninsula designation as of this afternoon. This area is intended for lower density residential development with some accessory commercial uses. Staff are of the opinion that the proposal does not contravene OCP policy for the area. Again, looking at our kind of evaluation matrix, providing for short-term economic activities, the TUP will allow long-term camping for essentially a commercial rental. So it's a bit of a cross between a long-term campsite and a long-term residential use. This is very similar to the previous TUP we just discussed, except the only difference is this would be rented to an outside party, not used by the owner of the property. Ensuring long-term public policy for the area is not changed. Again, as this is sort of a long-term residential camping use, it's generally aligned with OCP policy. Again, staff want to be clear that this should be considered a temporary use only and is not intended as a bridge to a long-term use or a rezoning of the property. We also would be looking to ensure environmental impacts are minimal. Staff's understanding that the proposed area for the long-term camping use has previously been cleared. No additional clearing will be required if this TUP is granted. And there are no environmental development permit areas, no riparian areas that impact the property. So staff feel that environmental impacts should be minimal. The public interest being served is the provision of long-term accommodation for a Tofino-based family. And the private interest being served is financial gain to the applicant. Staff are recommending that a housing agreement be required should this application be approved. Regarding compatibility with the surrounding development, the subject property is fairly large and staff feel that the use will not be visible from the neighboring properties. However, it is worth acknowledging that although the use itself, which is essentially long-term residential rental, is not out of line with the area in question, the character or sort of the form of the use is not exactly compliant with neighboring properties, which all have code compliant structures and kind of long-term permanent houses on them. So servicing the RV will be connected to district and sewer and water via strata services. It's worth noting that concerns have been raised by a few neighboring properties regarding the capacity of the private strata infrastructure. Staff have had some other considerations with this regarding building permits for some of those properties. It's staff's understanding that the strata infrastructure is fairly heavily loaded at the moment. However, it is worth noting that this is private infrastructure and it's essentially out of the District of Tofino's jurisdiction, though this was something that came up in a few public comments, so staff felt it was worth mentioning. A housing agreement is also being recommended by staff. It is essentially the best tool that we have to ensure that the rental use is actually used in conformance with the recommendations of the Affordable Housing Needs Assessment to provide long-term affordable housing. That's generally the primary reason that we support these types of temporary use permits, and it's been a standard sort of tool that we've used for all similar temporary use permits. So even though we're only talking about one unit at this moment, staff feel that it's best to ensure that that unit is under the constraints of a housing agreement. Notifications were sent out on February 26th and published in the Westerly News on March 3rd. There were 2 emails that were received by staff. One was in favor. That was an email written by the couple that are intending to reside in the unit, and one was opposed. There were 3 phone calls that were received by staff. None of these phone calls were in favor. Some of the significant concerns that were brought up were the servicing capacity of the strata infrastructure. Again, it's worth noting that this is outside of the district's jurisdiction, outside of our control. However, it is a bit of a concern for the neighboring properties. The kind of ongoing use of the property, there have been other sort of long-term uses, long-term rental uses that are not in conformance with the zoning bylaw and in structures that are not in conformance with BC Building Code, as has been noted by the applicant in her previous comments. There are some concerns about the possibility of future additional camping use on the property. Neighbors didn't want this to be to set any sort of a precedent and allow numerous other units to be able to locate there. Traffic accessing the property and general privacy concerns were also mentioned a couple times. The options at this point would be to approve the permit as amended, deny the permit, defer, otherwise deal with the permit. Staff are recommending the first option. Again, recognize that the report and subsequent temporary use permit, was prepared prior to any of the feedback that was received. However, one of the primary concerns, that being the capacity of the infrastructure, is not really within the control of the District of Tofino and actually in the control of the Strata Corporation for those lots. If there are any questions or comments, I'm happy to answer, and that's the end of my presentation for this report.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions for Peter? Councillor Chalmers.
Hi, Peter. Thank you for this. I do have more questions about the servicing and understanding that it's not on the district. However, I'm trying to look at it like I would if it was direct to the district and we felt that the lines they were connecting to were also at capacity. And what tools does the strata have to decide if they can hook up or not, or if we approved it and then the applicant hooked up and then, you know, they weren't able to, there was a larger issue. Do you know much about that?
Not in particular, to be honest. Because it's essentially private infrastructure, it's something that's difficult for the district to kind of control. So similar to the previous application for the temporary use permit at Ocean Park, if the district can grant permission, however, the Strata Corporation has its own bylaws. So the district can say, yes, we're fine from a district perspective with you having this temporary use permit for 2 or 3 years or however long it is. However, the strata still may have bylaws that do not allow that use. And so the applicant would then have to go to the strata and say, okay, the district has approved this use. Now I need to work with my strata corporation in order to ensure that it's okay by all of their bylaws. I'm not sure what the structure of the strata corporation is for that particular subdivision. I anticipate that it's not quite as, I guess, structured as say an Ocean Park strata or other condominium strata. However, they are an independent corporation and it is likely that they have particular bylaws. And I don't know what their specific agreement is related to servicing and how services are managed and repaired and how the cost burden for that is shared between the properties. However, I would imagine that there is within their strata corporation documents some sort of reference to those kinds of things. But it's a little bit challenging from a district perspective to understand or take responsibility if any of the infrastructure is overloaded.
Thank you. My thoughts on this and my concerns, and I'm curious to see the other council. I didn't get the letters until just before the meeting, so didn't have really a lot of time to look into it more. With the other applicant, I was able to take the time to kind of talk to the strata and understand a little bit. And with I really, really appreciate that the applicant is looking to house locals to continue that on with the fact that there are other illegal structures already on the property and that there is the potential for a burden. I do have some hesitations and I'm curious to hear what others say.
Councillor Anderson.
I'm a little uncomfortable with granting this one, partly because the property has fallen quite wide of being in compliance by the sounds of it up till now. But the servicing issue is certainly a concern. I don't know if any of the tiny homes that might exist there now are currently connected to service or not. So if this one, I don't know if it will be adding to the servicing requirements or reducing it overall. So I think that's one consideration. On the previous temporary use permit that we looked at for the RV, it was quite specific to the owner of the property living there. And also on this one, we don't know what sort of who will be living there without the suggested housing agreement, which would sort of suggest that maybe it could be turned over to other users as long as they met the agreement. But I'm just wondering if it also could be a situation where different sizes of RV or tiny homes might be located, because the application isn't specific to a particular dwelling unit that I can tell. I mean, right now there's a tiny home that it's specific to, but that's not written into the TUP. So I'm just a little uncomfortable overall with it, especially after the letters that we received today. So that's I'm sort of leaning towards denying it or giving it a very short term. to try and see if some better compliance or to see indeed if the strata will go along with the use. So that's where I'm at right now.
Similar to Councillor Anderson, I have hesitation on this. I need some clarification as to what the long-term goal is. Usually when somebody applies for a temporary use permit, I'm pretty clear what they're trying to do once that permit expires. On this one, I'm not really sure at all. Can you add anything?
Certainly, I can. I suppose the one thing that I would say is that my understanding from speaking with the applicant is that she has allowed this use on her property primarily to offset the financial losses that were brought on by having to shut down her vacation rental business due to the COVID-19 situation. So as a result of that, I believe she took on long-term renters and allowed people to move onto the property and rented essentially parts of the property for commercial gain, and is now looking to come into better compliance. Is still working. I would say our bylaw enforcement officers and business license officer have been out to the property, I believe, multiple times in the past few months to try and work with the applicant to bring some of these situations into compliance. And my understanding is that there are still multiple units on the property that are not in compliance. However, this temporary use permit would allow one of those units to stay, and the applicant is working on evicting other non-conforming uses and non-conforming dwellings on the property. So as far as the long-term goal, I think my understanding is that this is a short-term kind of economic band-aid, I suppose, is one way to describe it, in order to offset the losses brought on by the pandemic. And the one other thing that's not particularly related, but I feel like is worth mentioning, is that regarding the infrastructure, we don't actually have any hard data on where they're at in terms of the capacity, the size of the pipes, and the amount of structures that are hooked up to those. So what I've heard from some of the neighboring property owners is that they're uncomfortable with the capacity of their servicing to accommodate this temporary use permit application. However, we don't actually have any hard data that says, yes, it's okay, or no, it's not okay. I think there's just been some concerns raised by folks that are already, hooked onto that particular part of the infrastructure.
Well, maybe it's just me. I always prefer people to be compliant before I issue a permit. But let's see what Councillor Chalmers had something else to add. You're muted.
I was unmuted. I had the exact same question as you, Mayor McMaster, which was exactly that, what the goal was. And in listening to your answer, Peter, I might be a little bit more comfortable with something like a 1 year or a smaller TP, because the other side of that is that there are people living there. She is housing residents, and by removing this and taking it right into non-compliance, this family or whoever's living there will have to find somewhere else. So giving some leeway, like, to me, that would be a goal to have a TUP, but without an end goal. I have the same struggles. So with the kind of talking myself in circles, but I could see there being some lenience to give that family time to move on and shut it down, versus just having 3 years of housing that then ends, I guess is what I'm getting at. With still the concerns about the water, but if that's on the strata, then that's on the strata.
Councillor Steer, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo probably everything that's been said by all the fellow councillors, that I have a lot of reservations, only in the sense of, and all the pertinent questions were asked. I do, with the non-compliance, with the potential burden on that private infrastructure that the neighbors have indicated they are uncomfortable with, and there may not be data, but in terms of a private infrastructure through a strata corporation, they have some serious concerns about the capacity of their system. Also, once again, it was indicated the end goal was not clear. Just listening to Councillor Chalmers just now, giving maybe a potential 1-year option is something I'll have to think about in a second. If we have further conversation to allow the family or the occupants of that tiny home to find a more permanent solution to the issue. I am very supportive of finding these alternative solutions to the housing issue. I just don't think this is one of those appropriate solutions at this point in time, based on all the concerns that have been brought forward. That's about it. And I don't know if there's going to be further discussion, or if there might be a proposal as to an amendment in terms of the time frame, or an outright denial. So maybe a bit more feedback from the rest of the councillors to see. At this point, I would be reluctant to offer. Well, certainly I would say no to a 3-year TUP. That is for sure. In terms of that compromise situation of maybe a year, I would be open to a discussion around that.
Any other thoughts from council? Councillor Anderson.
Well, I would like to be able to support alternative housing solutions, but certainly the whole tiny home problem is around the building standards and the safety. You know, that I think I've seen a lot of tiny homes, and in checking them out on different websites and so on, and some of them look great, some of them don't. So they kind of really range in safety standards and even livability standards. And while a lot of people are willing to live in them, I think that they may bring liabilities to the district in permitting them, since there is no building code around them. So it's something that we really need to wrestle with and try get in front of. I don't know how we can do that, or if because I see anything going forward, especially around the tiny homes that are constructed by whoever, and I mean, RVs, I think there's at least some standards around those. But tiny homes themselves could range quite broadly in what they're offering in terms of safety and fire protection, and also how they can hook up to sewers, how they hook up to electrical, how they hook up to water is another area. Those are all areas of safety concerns. So I'm worried that if we do start approving tiny homes as a temporary use permit, we may be flooded with applications of things that we really don't know what they are. So I'm very mindful, though, that there's people actually living there, and that is probably their only option for a place to live right now. So if anything, I could be convinced for sort of quite a short term, a year or less, use of this while they sort of find a better option of location, or maybe a better housing solution. But I think the district sort of runs the danger of starting to approve tiny homes before we really have any standards around them. So that's where I'm at.
Elise, you have your hand up.
Through the chair, the applicant has let me know that she would like to request to speak to some of the points that have been made around the council table, and I let her know that I would make that request to council if you'd like to hear from the applicant.
What does council wish? I'm not a fan once we started discussion. Councillor Anderson?
No, I think we've heard from we've heard from the proponent once, and I think that was more than is usually offered to people to speak to it. So
I agree. Any other? Councillor Chalmers, you're in agreement? Councillor Steers nodding his head. You can convey that message, Elise.
Yes, thank you.
Well, Councillor Steer, you put your hand up. I'm inclined to deny the application. Otherwise, I feel we're going to have lots of people putting RVs on the property and then applying for a permit, rather than applying for a permit before they put a RV there. Councillor Steer.
Yeah, I'm moving more towards that direction, and you know, the stated goal part of the as put through Mr. Thick was as a temporary solution to some of the financial issues that were being addressed as one of the motivating factors for this TUP to be initiated. And with the non-compliance that is already on the property itself. And Councillor Anderson brings up, you know, the issue of the tiny homes and the standards that we haven't, you know, as much as I am very much in support of those alternative forms of housing, as I'm going to probably be moving, well, I will be moving more inclined to be denying this TUP at this time.
Councillor Anderson, do you have anything else to say? Then I'll ask Councillor Chalmers. Councillor Anderson says no. Councillor Chalmers, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think at this point with the will of council, I would be content with a 1 year, but if everybody's more leaning towards declining, then I'm also comfortable declining, because that was my initial thoughts anyway. So,
Councillor Steer.
Yeah, I don't know, Councillor Chalmers, if you wanted to maybe reiterate a bit. I mean, because I did like your suggestion as a temporary, and I'm just wondering if you might have more to add to that. Just
the fact that the applicant did bring it forward to, I think of it more as for an end goal. So it allows them to come into compliance while they work towards an end goal, which will be to finish it off and to have the people that are currently living there non-compliance to find somewhere else to live. That would be the reasons that I would keep it. Otherwise, we are denying it. There's still people living there. They will be going at it, you know, not in compliance until they found something else. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Councillor Anderson.
well, it seems like maybe something like a 9-month period might be agreeable to give the people that are living there a chance to find a new situation, and some time to maybe for the owner of the property to try and work those issues out with their neighbors, and then if they come to some sort of agreement, I suppose we might be able to extend that or look at it again. They may reapply, but I really do worry about what tiny homes are. So I think that question needs to be settled at some point. But I'd be willing to go with a 9-month period. So
Can we go less than a year, Peter?
Certainly, yeah. The Local Government Act indicates that a TUP can be granted for up to 3 years. So that seems to indicate that it could be anywhere from 6 hours to 3 years.
Is anyone, Councillor Steer?
Yeah, I would, I'll support Councillor Anderson in conjunction with Councillor Chalmers' request for TUP. In this case, I think 9 months would be an appropriate amount.
Someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that the staff be authorized to approve the temporary use permit attached as Appendix 1 to the staff report, temporary use permit Sutton 1430 Pacific Rim Highway, dated March 9th, 2021, for a period of 9 months.
Any, seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, moving on. Item 8.8, zoning amendment application, the Shore, 368 to 318 Main Street. Over to you, Peter, again.
Sure, I'll be sharing my screen for this as well. So this presentation relates to the report that recommends third reading of a zoning amendment application that council has been considering for the past couple of years. This is for the foreshore lease known as 380 Main Street. A bit of background on the application. It was initially received in May of 2018. Permission to proceed was granted April 2020. First reading September of 2020. Second reading was January of this year, and the public hearing was waived at the same meeting on January 26th of 21, or pardon me, I should say the public hearing requirement was waived. Since that time, staff have completed the legislative requirements for the notice of public hearing requirement waiver. The location of the property is known as 380 Main Street. So this is the foreshore lease that's in front of the shore building. The foreshore lease currently has sort of a venue rental area as well as a couple commercial units on it. And then there's a marina to the, I suppose, the kind of the western portion of the foreshore lease. The proposal is a zoning amendment that would reduce the minimum required lot size for the Shore Comprehensive Development Zone. The purpose of this zoning amendment would facilitate a subdivision of the filled foreshore area of the foreshore lease. So the amendment would then allow the applicant to purchase this filled portion from the province after it had been subdivided off of the foreshore lease. And then the parcel will be held independently. Once that parcel is held independently, it can then be linked to the foreshore lease, and then that would allow the foreshore lease to be unlinked or uncoupled from the strata lots within the shore building that it is currently linked to. So for council's information, the applicant, Moss Development, is the owner of strata lot 25, which is one of the units in the shore building, which currently holds I guess the rights and the authority over the foreshore lease. The applicant would like to separate those two assets, and so is going through this process to now link the foreshore lease to this proposed to be created new parcel, so that the actual unit within the shore can be held independently. So this small blue shape kind of shows the approximate area of the new proposed lot. It primarily consists of the area of the foreshore lease that is covered in blast rock. That blast rock was placed there quite some time ago as a sort of a geotechnical necessity in order to facilitate the use of the upland property. So while it is still technically part of the foreshore lease, it is now kind of filled foreshore, and it's the part of the lease that's actually just the blast rock, or more or less the blast rock with a little bit of some of the hardscaping included. So prior to final reading, staff have recommended that a no build covenant be prepared and agreed to by the applicant and the district for the proposed new lot. This would just prevent any unwanted structures from being erected on that area of the new lot. As was fairly evident in the previous slide, I think the area is not really a great building lot in any way. It's essentially blast rock and a portion of kind of filled foreshore. So it would be very unlikely that the applicant would be looking to build anything significant there. However, there is the potential for some sort of a fence or something like that that would maybe obstruct public access to the water or obstruct the views from the units in the shore building. Staff are also recommending that a statutory right-of-way that is in favor of the district through the land that's accruing to Strata Unit 25. So Strata Unit 25, again, is the unit that is owned by the applicant and is currently tied to the foreshore lease. That there's a small strip that essentially interrupts the existing district right-of-ways that is owned by Strata Unit 25. Although it has not been an issue, there is the legal potential for some sort of a gate or fence to be put up in that area if we don't ensure that we have a statutory right of way through that small chunk of land that ensures continued public access down onto the water and onto the actual marina where we have a sublease in place for access to the water. There was also a discussion about community amenity contributions. I feel it's worth mentioning. And at last consideration of this application, staff recommended that beyond the proposed no build covenant and statutory right away, no further community amenity contribution be assessed. My understanding is that council was in concurrence with that, and so staff have not further discussed the community amenity contribution with the applicants. So this afternoon, we'll be considering third reading of the bylaw. Another option would be to amend the bylaw and grant third reading. The application would be denied or deferred, or they're otherwise dealt with. Staff are recommending that third reading be granted. So next steps would be any final considerations and agreements as described. That would be the no build covenant and the statutory right of way, and then the application will be brought back for adoption by council. So that's the end of the presentation. If there's any questions, I'm happy to speak to them.
Thank you, Peter. Are there any questions for Peter? Seeing none, and to save time, I'll move the recommendation from the chair that District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1296/2020 be read a third time, and that adoption of bylaw number 1296/2020 be withheld until the following requirements have been met to the satisfaction of staff. A no build covenant has been prepared and agreed to by the applicant and the district's manager of community sustainability, and B, a statutory right of way has been granted in favour of the district through the land accruing to Strata Unit 25 in the shore building to ensure continued public access to the water to the satisfaction of the district's manager of community sustainability. Have a seconder? Councillor Chalmers. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed. Motion is carried. Moving on to item 8.9, zoning amendment application, Tofino Resort and Marina, 634 Camel Street.
You. So this is my last appearance this afternoon. I'll be sharing my screen for this as well. This presentation is related to the zoning amendment application for Tofino Resort and Marina at 634 Campbell Street. Again, this is concerning the foreshore lease for the property. We are considering third reading this afternoon for this application. The application was initially received July of 2018. Permission to proceed was granted May of 2020. First reading was granted August of 2020. Second reading was granted January of this year, and the public hearing requirement was also waived at that same meeting on January 12th. Staff have again completed the required legislative motions for notice of public hearing requirement waiver. So the location of the foreshore lease is on the left of the screen in red. So that's the entire foreshore lease. This foreshore lease was expanded during the sort of renovations and redevelopment of the marina a few years ago, approximately 4 years ago. During that time, as the lease was expanded, it actually included areas that were not zone W1, which is waterfront commercial. It actually included areas that were zoned marine community, and there are some different zoning permissions. However, the applicant was under the understanding that the lease was kind of had universal zoning permissions. So we've been working with the applicant for the last couple of years to bring them into compliance. They're currently operating as if the lease does have all those permissions. However, they've been working with the district in order to come into compliance. So on the right-hand side of the screen, those are the two small sections of the waterfront lease that we are considering to rezone currently. Those are the areas that are zoned MC1. They would be rezoned to W1. I believe I just explained the proposal, but just to be clear, the amendment would permit the applicant to allow commercial float plane drop off and pickup in the square area of the foreshore lease that is located, I suppose, to the east and be on the right side of the previous image. So this has been considered by council a couple of times already. One of the last requirements for final reading would be the receipt of the offered $2,400 community amenity contribution. The community amenity contribution actually matches an amount of money that was recently expended by the district to gather some more information regarding a cost estimate for a indoor recreation facility in support of a recent grant application. However, it is up to council as to which stream the community amenity contribution should be placed. The CAC guidelines outline 4 possible kind of streams that the revenue could be placed in. That's affordable housing, indoor recreation facility, waterfront walkway, or public art. My understanding is that we don't need a specific resolution related to this. Simply sort of an agreement and direction from council is appropriate at this point. And other than that, the options would be to grant third reading to the bylaw, grant third reading as amended, defer, deny the application, otherwise deal with the application. Staff are recommending third reading of the bylaw. Next steps would be to receive the CAC as described and ensure it is added to the revenue stream that council outlines today. And then we will bring the application back for adoption. That's the end of the presentation. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to speak to them.
Thanks, Peter. Any questions for Peter? Okay, seeing none, would someone like to move the recommendation?
Sure. Did we also want to discuss the community contribution right now? Is this when you're looking for it, Peter?
Yes, that would be very helpful. We could wait until the adoption if council would like some more time to discuss. However, if there's a specific agreement that can be reached today, that simplifies the process moving forward, certainly.
I was wondering about deferring the amenity contribution until we have a full council, which would be in 2 weeks.
I'd rather deal with it now, as we've been going through this as a council and we've gotten to this point with the full understanding. So to expect to bring new councillors into it at the last minute, I don't think it's fair on them. But if anybody else feels differently.
I concur with Councillor Chalmers. We can deal with this pretty quickly here, I think.
I'm happy to deal with it now.
Okay, well, Councillor Stair, you seem pretty convinced whether it's money's coming, so.
Well, I would like to suggest as the two, as my old understanding, and there was a couple others that were put in there, that affordable housing and indoor rec were the 2 areas that and I see that there are other possibilities. I would still like to recommend that the community contribution would go towards the indoor recreation facility at this time.
Councillor Chalmers.
I agree with Councillor Steer.
I agree as well. That was my idea as well.
Okay.
And
So
now
did you hear that, Peter?
Yeah, certainly. As I mentioned, I don't believe that we need a resolution from council at this moment in time. If the CAO or manager of corporate services would like to correct me, I'd be happy for that. But my understanding is just sort of the verbal direction is fine.
Yeah, we're fine to proceed with what we have.
Okay. Councillor Anderson, back to you moving the recommendation.
Okay, I will move that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1293 2020 be read a third time.
Seconded by Councillor Chalmers. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed, motion is carried. Moving on to item 8.10, 2021 Tourism Tofino appointment, report from corporate services. Over to you, Elise.
I can see that Councillor Steer just had his hand up. Was that important?
That's okay. If we could complete this one, and then I will need a 2-minute bio break so I can fully concentrate, but I can get through this one.
Okay. I have no presentation for council tonight. However, I'm here to answer questions about the report or anything contained therein.
Councillor Chalmers, you're the representative at the moment, are you?
I would love to stay the representative unless anybody else has a desire.
I have no issues with reappointing Councillor Chalmers, because even if we get a new council, they have the ability to appoint another member. So unless anyone has any objections, I'll move that Councillor Chalmers be applied to the Tourism Tofino Board of Directors for a term ending the earliest of 1, council appoints another member, 2, the council member ceases to hold office, 3, the Tourism Tofino Annual General Meeting in March 2022. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed, motion is carried. So I have a 2-minute recess. I was trying to hang in there till camera, but
We're so close.
oh, that's better. Okay, I think we can continue. We have quorum. So item 8.11, Board of Variance. I'll move from the chair that the minutes of the Board of Variance meeting held February 25, 2021 be received. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Chalmers. Any discussion? I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed, motion carried. Item 8.12, Design Review Panel. I'll move from the chair that the minutes of the Design Review Panel meeting held February 4th, 2021 be received. Have a seconder? Councillor Anderson. All those in favour? None opposed, a motion is carried. Item 8.13. I'll move from the chair that the minutes of the Tofino Recreation Commission meeting held February 17th, 2021 be received. Have a seconder? Councillor Steer. All those in favour? None opposed, motion is carried. Nothing to do bylaws. On to item 10.1, a verbal report from Councillor Steer regarding the Harbour Authority and ACRD update. We are enthralled.
Well, that's why I had to need the bio break, because I will apologize. It will be a little longer than usual. The ACRD update, a lot of it was relevant to the West Coast here. So I'm sure you all knew that this was coming. So I'll start with Harbour Authority. A few quick ones here. We did hire, the Harbour Authority did hire a new harbour manager, Mr. Kevin Acrd, who was the wharfinger previous and worked under the previous harbour manager for a year, by far the most qualified applicant. We had far fewer than the last time we did this, which we had 35 applicants, and this time there was less than half of that. The Harbour Authority is also going to be, the structural amendments to the bylaws have been incorporated, and it now has to go to a membership meeting, which we will be having. I'm inviting everybody here to the membership meeting that will be coming up on Saturday, March 27th, 4:30 p.m. Very exciting. It will be a Zoom meeting. Please all attend if necessary. Number 3, just a quick, the upgrades to Armitage, aka the crab dock, have been complete, and the installation of the required fire and safety infrastructure should be completed as we speak. Now, moving on to the ACRD, there were a few relative issues regarding the ACRD that I thought council should be updated on. Currently going through the review of the 2021 to 2025 ACRD financial plan. The details form the basis of the tax requisition to the District of Tofino, which last year accounted for close to 10% of our property tax bill. So it's not an insignificant amount. So the discussions around it were very fruitful. And once again, the CFO at the ACRD, Ms. Terry Fong, presents it in a very accessible way that it's a very complicated piece of documentation, but she was able to give it to us in a way that we can all comprehend. And there were many things related to the West Coast. I won't go through them all in detail. But just to say that will be finalized tomorrow at the ACRD board meeting. Another interesting discussion was one that came up as a delegation. It was from Tofino Bus Lines, and that by the owner Travis Wilson, and was commenting on the suspension of the services that Tofino Bus had encountered, and the proposal that they have to the provincial government. Requesting support to be able to make that service available again. Last year, it was over a 90% reduction in passengers. Obviously, not financially viable for the company to do. The only route that had any movement was Tofino, but that was, as I say, over 90% reduced capacity. So that service is suspended. And there is currently that proposal into the provincial government for support. It did also open up a very interesting conversation around the broader conversation around interregional transit plans and the serious need for those plans to be updated. And it was something that we feel can be brought to the UBCM through the regional district, but I also think municipalities certainly should have a voice in that conversation. It was also noted that within that conversation of transportation, that one of the interesting things that came up, one of the prime strategies for addressing poverty reduction on par with housing was transportation. So a very relative issue that that hopefully we'll be continuing that conversation. Well, we will be continuing at the ACRD level and hopefully bring to the district at some point in time. Then the next part of the ACRD was the West Coast Committee met on March 3rd, and that the West Coast Committee comprises some of the treaty nations as well as District of Tofino, Electoral Area C, Long Beach, and the District of Tla-o-qui-aht. And there were a few pertinent things related to the West Coast. For example, out at the airport, there were a number of lease renewals that were out there. There's a discussion around the long-term asset management of those airport facilities. And one significant, well, actually a couple, there was a delegation from the Ocean Legacy Foundation, Chloe Dubois, and Surfrider about the recycling of the ocean debris plastics and other plastics coming from the aquaculture industry. And it was a great presentation. I will be inviting them to give a committee of the whole presentation to council, because it's an interesting project with a lot of in Clayoquot Sound as well as the surrounding areas. I think council would be quite interested in hearing. There was also a presentation from the CARE Network, Mr. James Rogers, indicating some of the ongoing projects and work that they're doing out at the airport. There was one interesting one also. Cascadia Air had a presentation to operate a scheduled flight service out of the Long Beach Airport. Details of that scheduling at this point aren't firm, but there is an application for that, and that will be going to the board tomorrow. We'll be looking at that, but it came through the West Coast Committee. And then there was also one other one that I thought was great, was a local initiative, a lease that's recommended for the Coastal Hive, which will be producing or installing some greenhouses up on those airport lands to produce fresh vegetables for the coast. So this is a short-term lease at this point with long-term goals of up to 40 greenhouses that will produce up to supplies to up to 2,000 people for the peninsula. So an interesting proposal, locally initiated here from some Tofino residents that will be going to the board tomorrow as well. Right after that was a committee of the whole through the ACRD, and a very big issue that has been brought forward was the unauthorized camping that we know in our region. This was a large stakeholder meeting. There's 26 representatives at that meeting, including the District of Tofino. Chief Baker spoke on some of the bylaw concerns related to the unauthorized camping, specifically within the district. Then I spoke to some of those issues that we encounter out in the ACRD lands, out in West Main and those areas out there. It was a very fulsome discussion. At the end of it, was recognized this is a huge regional issue. The issues that we face here on the West Coast with the unauthorized camping, Port Alberni has issues surrounding it. There's a more addressed around the unauthorized camping, around homeless issues. Areas around Sprout Lake had issues similar. So it was decided, and rightly so, that this is a regional question that it needs a fulsome look at, because we don't just want to push issues from one jurisdiction to another. So at the end of it, it was decided that the recommendation to come to the board to look at putting a what might be termed as a technical working group to look at these larger regional issues of the unauthorized camping. And once again, it touches on poverty, homeless issues that go on and on housing. So that was a big issue that came forward, and I'll have more to report back out onto that later as we move forward. The ACRD also had a meeting with our MLA, not Minister Osborne, our MLA Osborne, and that discussed many of the issues that I had touched on, as well as some that relevant to the West Coast here, including the Tofino General Hospital and the movements towards a replacement facility out here. So that's it. There was a lot more, and these are all obviously very relevant issues to the West Coast. I am looking at, once we have a full council and our new mayor in place here, to invite the CAO of the ACRD, Mr. Douglas Holmes, and possibly the Chairman John Jack, to come to the West Coast, to come to council, maybe at a committee of the whole, to give some of the new councillors, an understanding of the ACRD and its significance to the issues around the West Coast. That is it.
Thank you, Councillor Steer. With regards to transportation, I believe Premier Horgan made an announcement this morning with regards to transportation. I didn't hear it all, but I know Wilson Transportation was specifically mentioned. So I believe they will be getting some help.
Great. That's awesome. That's great news.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillor Steer before we move on? Okay, moving on. Elise, do we have any people signed up for question period?
Thank you. Through the chair, Dan Law has requested to speak to council. Dan, I'm going to unmute you for up to 2 minutes.
He's still muted.
He's still muted, yeah.
Oh, there you go. Just
Hi, Dan.
hi, how are you doing?
Good.
Good work. I'm just going to be very quick. I just want to thank council and district staff for the financial plan and OCP. Great work. Well done. I look forward to working with you all very soon.
Thank you and congratulations.
Thanks.
And if there's no more people signed up, I will move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to sections 91A, C and G of the Community Charter to discuss matters relating to personal information about an individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee or agent, employee relations, litigation or potential litigation affecting the municipality. Seconded by Councillor Anderson. All those in favour,